Okay, tonight's speaker has come from Commonwealth Foundation, and she's a graduate of Messiah, and she works with an organization that I think many of you get a notice from, mail from, that's pushing awareness and an advocacy group for certain issues. And the topic for tonight, wherever she decides to take it, will be the role of unions in the public sector. So we've seen some news recently about the activity of the unions in the private sector with the Volkswagen plant. I believe it was in Tennessee. And the vote there went not to organize. The National Labor Relations Board is going to challenge that and try to have another crack at the apple. But public unions might be a little bit different in the fact that the people that actually pay the bills don't always have a seat at the table. So tonight's topic should be very interesting. I think she's going to make present some materials, and then are you going to take questions and answers? So we'll be on our best behavior, or I'll turn into the Wicked Witch again. So at this time, I'd like to have Katrina come forward.
All right, if you guys cannot hear me, let me know. I'm going to need to walk, so I don't have a button to press to do my PowerPoint. So just to start, if you're not familiar with the Commonwealth Foundation, we're a research and educational institute. So what we're doing is we're looking at the policies that are going on in Harrisburg, and we're pushing for solutions that are free market, limited government, personal responsibility focused. And we try to get that information out to 3 audiences. We work with the general public, groups such as yourselves, and it's a real honor to be here and speak to you today. We also work with the media to try to provide that perspective, and with legislators. And so that's what I do. I'm actually our Director of Government Affairs, and I specialize in pension policy. So at the end of the presentation, if you have questions about pensions, feel free to ask those, because that's really my area. Are you pushing that for me? Are you sure? Okay, when?
When?
So this is actually my nephew and my niece, and the reason I have it up here is because while I deal a lot with spreadsheets and budgets and numbers, the reason I do what I do is because policy affects people. And I'm sure that's why you're here today, that you know firsthand that bad policy can raise property taxes, bad policy can provide poor roads or too many taxes. And that's really the focus of why I do what I do. So in this presentation, I'm actually going to be focusing on government unions and their role in education, but I'm going to be pulling in a lot of stories about people, because I think that's the best way to understand why policy matters. So this is Julie. Julie is a public school librarian in Dauphin County. She's near where I live in Harrisburg, and she was a former elementary school teacher. Julie last week just sent out this email, and I'm going to read her email to you. She sent the email through a project called Free to Teach, and I'll explain a little bit about it. But here's what Julie said. She sent this email out to every teacher in Pennsylvania. She said, "I've been an elementary public school teacher for 27 years. For most of that time, I was a union member. I even had a stint as a building representative. As a building rep, I was discouraged to find how little the PSEA, which is the Pennsylvania State Education Association, responds to members' concerns. I disagreed with the political candidates the PSEA recommended we vote for, but my union still supported all of the get out to vote efforts for those candidates. As a building rep, I was told to work a phone bank for former Governor Ed Rendell. The union never asked which way I actually voted. More disheartening, was what I would hear from my fellow union reps. They would laugh about wasting money from teachers, from their union dues, at expensive dinners and trips. After observing these attitudes for a while, I decided to leave my union. And the disconnect I saw does not seem to be an isolated experience. The NEA recently surveyed its own rank and file members and found that more than 70% had not had contact with their local union delegates, the very people meant to represent them. I've grown convinced that the only way union members can get more accountability from leadership is to understand how their union dues are being spent. Did you know, for example, that only 16% of what PSEA collects towards what they collect, all their money, goes towards representative activities? Only 16%. Or that last year the union spent $3.8 million of your union dues. I really can turn that. I don't want. Okay. $3.8 million of your union dues on political activity and lobbying. $3.8 million. Activities like the phone bank that I had to work. I encourage you to learn the facts and then decide for yourself whether you're getting your money's worth from your union. Signed, Julie Rabb, Public Elementary School Librarian, Dauphin County. So what I'm going to do today is explain really what was in Julie's email and look at how a bit of the history briefly of the union in Pennsylvania, but really what it's become today, and then talk about what we think are the solutions. Pennsylvania is what we call a compulsory union state. So it's the opposite of what people use the term right to work. In Pennsylvania, in certain areas of public employment, you can be forced to join a union or pay a fair share fee in order to keep your job. There's about 24 states in the nation that are right to work, so that means you don't have to join a union, but Pennsylvania isn't one of them. What happened in the 1970s is that's when Pennsylvania passed a law that allowed teachers to go on strikes. And it wasn't until 1988 that the state allowed it to become compulsory union. So when we're talking about education policies and being forced to join a union, that's really only been for the last 25 years that's been a policy in Pennsylvania. And what we've seen through that transition is that the PSEA has transitioned more from an organization that's really focused on the members and the students to really a political organization. So if you can see this chart here, this outlines what was in Julie's email. So this is what the PSEA is reporting. And so you can see only 16% of their spending is going to things like contract negotiations and representing the unions. And 5% is going to political activities and lobbying. And then you see that more than half is going to just things like administration, paying the salaries of the union leaders, which can be, $100,000 to $200,000+ salaries they're getting, way more than the members. So they also reported that $3.8 million of the union dues is spent on political activity. Now the important thing to understand, this is union dues. So in Pennsylvania, if your school decides to vote to become what's called an agency shop, that is when it requires you to be part of the union. So it is possible, though it's very rare in Pennsylvania, that you could be a teacher in a district that does not require you to be part of the union. But if they do it, they put it in the contract. It still has to go to vote, and if it passes, then you have to be part of the union or pay a fair share fee. But even within the union dues, so this is not PAC money, a portion of their dues is used for political spending. And this is what we found has shocked teachers. I don't know if you guys remember Tom Smith. When Tom Smith ran for U.S. Senate, his daughter was a teacher. And she was aware that her union dues were actually being used to defeat her dad when he was running for office. And she didn't have a choice. Because while union members have the ability to vote in elections for who they're going to elect, they don't have the option to talk about what candidates the PSEA is going to endorse. And while we think everyone should have the right to be involved in political, you shouldn't be forced, and your money shouldn't be used, especially taxpayer resources, to push a political agenda. And that's what's happening in Pennsylvania. So let me just read you some examples, because I don't have these memorized. But so of that 3.8 million, here's some things it was used for. 2.3 million was used for political and lobbying activities. You had 110,000 for consulting. You had get out the votes. You had 65,000 for meeting in hotel lodges, budget surveys, phone banks, and you have things like this. These, which is surprising to people, is not spent with any PAC money. So your dues money can be used for these type of educational pieces. But what the educational piece says essentially is that if you don't give to their PAC, then you don't need a pension. You're outsourcing everything. You want larger classroom size. You're a fan of corporate tax breaks. And the only way to not be a fan of these things is to give to their PAC. Again, these are just examples of things that aren't considered lobbying or political. So again, teachers will receive things like this that says, if you care about education, you'll vote this way. So when teachers started really seeing the way their money was getting used, they started getting more involved. So we work with the teachers on a project called Free to Teach. And what that does is it creates a platform for teachers to email their teachers. Because what they found was the main problem was communication. Teachers were just getting communication from, say, the PSEA, because they had those email addresses. So now we have teachers who are champions who actually email their teachers and say, like Julie did, hey, wait a minute. You need to think about where your union dues are going. You need to think about these policies, and that helps the teachers be able to speak out. Because there are a lot of teachers who have concerns, but it's scary. Standing up and speaking out as a teacher is scary. So when we have teachers that send emails like the one Julie did to other teachers, they actually receive threats. So we have to have lawyers on staff to say that what they did is not wrong, that they can email their teachers and not feel worried about losing their job. But they do. This is just another example of, it's not just the PSCA, but also the NEA, some of the things they were using. But one teacher who I talked to was particularly upset, who actually decided to retire early. It was things like finding out his money was used for marriage equality, to fight things that he doesn't believe in, but he didn't have that choice. Another example is a few years ago, PSEA sent money to Wisconsin to try to recall Scott Walker. It was about $21,000. Regardless of what you think of Scott Walker, sending money to Wisconsin does not help the students in Pennsylvania. And that is why a lot of these teachers have begun to speak out. This is just a little graph we used. But essentially, one of the things in Pennsylvania is that we have this law that is unique to a lot of other states. And what it is it allows the contract negotiations, it allows them to require the school district to become the collection agency. So just like your taxes are taken out if you're at your job, they take out and withhold the union dues or your PAC contributions, and they'll bundle that money together, and they'll send it to the union, and then that allows them to do their type of political activity. And most people don't ever, really realize it, and you really lose accountability when you do that. So think of a politician. You can't just, as a politician, you could try, but people wouldn't want to, give you a direct access to their bank account. You can't just pull the money out. And if you have to go talk to someone and ask them for money, you really open that line of communication. So what we were finding in Pennsylvania is that teachers felt like they didn't have that because their union reps could get their money regardless of that conversation. And other states that don't have it, actually click again. So here's just an example real quick of a state that doesn't have this law. So this is an example of Texas, and Texas is a right-to-work state, but its population is nearly twice of Pennsylvania's, and it spent $12.5 million. Its union spent, $12.5 million on kind of political activity. For the next one. Pennsylvania spent $50 million. So I do that just to show you that we, as a state, are spending more in our government unions on politics than many others.
50 cents a person, $4.
Yeah. Significant. Maybe, sorry, go back. Keep forward. Over the other way. So here, sorry, I'll read it because it's hard. Just an example of one teacher who said, "The union supports policies I completely disagree with, and I have to pay for it. I have no choice if I want to keep my job." So when we talk about the role of the union, you can see I can just talk. When we talk about the role of the union in education, what we found is that instead of always advocating what is the teacher's wishes, they find that it's actually very hard to go to their higher up. So you have local unions, and teachers typically will feel like they're a lot more responsive, but the higher they get, the less ability they have to make a difference and have a communication, even if they join, like a higher up, a building rep. And part of the reason they feel like there's this disconnect is partially because of this policy where their money is automatically deducted from their payroll. I mean, this is really unique in Pennsylvania that it has. So we think absolutely anyone should have the ability to, have a voice, especially in politics. But what you shouldn't be doing is using taxpayer resources to do it. And that's kind of the unfair advantage that you see right now. And that you couldn't have, say, if you're a gun advocate, you couldn't have your organization go to the school district and say, all your teachers are members, collect our union dues for us, bundle them together and send them to us. But that's kind of what this organization is doing. So the first step we see is actually there's legislation right now that would prevent taxpayer resources from being used for politics. So it's not saying that the union can't still have their union membership, but it would require the union to go collect that money themselves. So they can no longer, within their contract negotiations, say, school district, collect this money, collect our political money, bundle it up and send it to us. You have to go ask the individual for that money, and then when you're doing that, you kind of create that communication that doesn't exist right now. And beyond that, you shouldn't be using taxpayer resources for politics. I mean, we've seen in Pennsylvania's recent history that many politicians have lost office and even went to jail, such as John Purcell, for using taxpayer resources for politics. If you're a politician, you cannot use your office, your legislative office, to make a political phone call, not even one. Doing any type of campaigning in your office is illegal for a reason. Yet we're allowing taxpayer resources to be used for politics right now when it comes to schools. They're allowed to collect the money, bundle it, and send it together. So we see one of the first solutions is ending that. And we do believe that right to work is the direction to go. The first legislation is not right to work. We think it's ending the ability to use taxpayer resources to collect dues and political money, such as PAC money. But eventually, we do think right to work legislation, which allows you to decide whether or not you want to join the union, is the right direction for Pennsylvania, that you shouldn't be forced to lose your job if you don't want to join the organization. And if it's a good organization, you will want to join it. We think from the Commonwealth, there certainly is a position and a place for the union, but it shouldn't be forced. And if it's a good organization, people are going to want to join. We are a nonprofit. We can't force people to give to us. If they like what we're doing and support our cause, they will. And we're appreciative. And we think similarly unions would be formed just the same. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions.